Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to kick off Unit 4 by talking about variables. Now, here we're going to do Lesson 2. If you haven't already, go back and run through Lesson 1 quickly. It's just got a few different apps to explore that utilize variables, and it's hopefully going to give you a feel for how they work and then also the types of things we can create adding variables in the mix. Okay, otherwise, here we go with Lesson 2, variable investigation. Objective is going to be to use variables in a program to store values. So let's start off by defining a variable as a placeholder for a piece of information that can change. Okay, so anytime you want to store information, anytime you want to keep track of some type of information, okay, you're going to use a variable. For example, simple little game here. Something we might want to keep track of are this player's score or their lives. Okay, both those are being tracked up top, and the easiest way to do that is to utilize variables, okay, to keep track of both the score and the lives. So let's take a look at how variables work as far as how the code we're going to write relates to what the computer is actually doing with that variable. Okay, so I have on my screen here kind of a space for the code and then also the memory, what the computer is doing in the background. And then also here I've got my debug console. That's where we can print off statements to kind of take a look at what values are, what the values of these variables are. Okay, so first thing we need to do, kind of step one for dealing with a variable is to define it, give it a name. And in JavaScript, we'll use the keyword var as in variables. Okay, so I'll say var lives. And what that does then is the computer in its memory is it creates a space to hold something and it names it lives. Okay, step two with a variable is going to be to assign it a value. And if I'm talking about my variable lives still, what I can do is I can say lives with an equal sign 3. Now I'm not going to say lives equals 3. I'm going to say that as lives gets 3. And when I run that command, what the computer is going to do is it's going to take that value 3. It's going to place it in the spot in the computer's memory that I have designated lives, and it's going to hold on to that 3 there. Okay, now I can also define and assign a variable in one line. That'll just look like this. So for example, for the variable score, we'd say var score gets 10. And all in one step, the computer is going to put a spot in memory for the score value, and it's going to put that 10 in that spot. All right, so once we've defined and assigned some variables, we can then use them, and I can use those through some simple console log statements. So when I call the command console.log lives, what's going to happen is when the computer reads lives, it's going to go to the spot in the memory that has lives stored to it. It's going to find that, which is a 3. It's going to replace lives with the 3 with the value stored there. And then when this command's actually run and we print things, that 3 is going to print it off, okay, from the memory. We can do some other stuff with that. We can do something like console log lives plus 1. Again, what's going to happen there is anytime the computer sees lives in the code, it's going to go to that spot in the memory and replace lives with that stored value. Okay, so then we'd print off a 4 here. Or we could do something like this where we use both lives and score. Okay, computer is going to go to both of those places in the memory, replace everything with lives with what's stored with lives, everything for score with what's stored there, and then we print off the 13 by adding those together. All right, so that's the basic idea of how variables work and act as a placeholder to store information. Now, the other part of the definition we gave you was that variables can change, and let's show you how we do that right here. So once again, let's define a variable. Let's say var num. When we do that, the computer's memory is going to set aside a spot to store some information and name it num. Then we can assign. We can say num get 7. So the computer is going to take that 7 and store it in the space in memory named num. Then again, we can use it. We can console log num. Okay, so when I console log num, it's going to console log the 7 there. Okay, now let's do a reassignment. If I want to change the value of num, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to basically do the same statement I used to assign it. Just like we said num gets 7, here we can say num gets 2. And what's going to happen when we run that code then is it's going to take the 2, drop the 7 that's held in the storage space of num, and replace it with the 2. All right, so now when I console log num, I'm going to get the new value. We're going to print the 2 to the console. Okay, we can do that again. We can reassign num for a third time or as many times as we want. We can say num gets 13. What that's going to do is it's going to clear out what's in the space of num currently. It's going to now store 13 there. When I console log for a third time, we get something different. Okay, because each time I reference this num in my program, num was storing a different value. We reassigned it every time. All right, the idea that we can reassign things is going to be huge when it comes to make programs that can change, that can keep track of stuff, okay, as the user does different stuff. Let's take a look at one more thing before we jump into some actual programs, okay, using variables and expressions. And this right here is going to be the key to actually having our variables keep track and update as our program runs. Okay, so we've got some code. We'll kind of walk you through what's happening as we run it. So first off, var a will define a variable called a. Now for that, as far as the computer memory models goes, there's already slots of memory ready to go ahead of time before we start defining variables. The actually definition part just assigns a name to that memory slot. Okay, then our next line will assign. Okay, so we'll say a gets 5 and put 5 in that memory slot named a now. And then we can make another variable. We can say var b equals 7. So in one step, we're going to define and assign a variable called b, and we're going to store 7 in that spot. Okay, then a few things we haven't done yet. Take a look at this next line. A gets a plus 1. It's a little weird to assign a variable a value which includes its own name. When we do something like that, check out what happens. What's going to happen there when I run that, on the right side of the equal sign, when JavaScript reads the A, what it's going to do is it's going to go to the memory spot named A and replace A with what's currently at that memory slot. Okay, so we're going to now say, we could say A gets 5 plus 1 is 6. And then it's going to cancel out the 5 that was stored in the memory slot and replace it with a 6 here. Okay, so this is a little tricky to get your head wrapping around into. Going into this line of code, A was storing 5, coming out it's storing 6, and we're utilizing A within its own definition. Okay, that's a pattern we're going to see a lot as we go through the course. Okay, taking a variable and adding one to itself or subtracting one from itself. Okay, my last line, I can also do something like this. I can say that B gets A plus B. So in other words, we're going to reassign a variable with a different variable's value along with its own. When I run that line of code, the computer is going to go into the memory, grab the values of A and B, replace them into that expression. Okay, so instead of A plus B, we could say 6 plus 7. We know 6 plus 7 is 13, so we could reread this line of code as B gets 13. It'll then take that 13, replace the current 7 there. All right, and again, going into the code, B was 7, coming out it's 13. Another example of variable reassignment using other variables. All right, then a few details before we jump into the code. Number one, we're talking about variables, say gets instead of equals. Okay, when we're talking about in code, A equals B isn't a statement of an equality. It's an instruction to move memory around. So I wouldn't say, again, I won't say A equals B. I'd say A gets B, or A gets the value of B. Okay, same thing with these other dots, other bullet points. Okay, var score gets 0, not score is equal to 0, but it gets the value of 0. Or A gets the value of B plus 7. All right, it's a different way to think about it. This isn't math class. We're not talking equals. We're talking assignment. Okay, then last thing, when you go to start creating your own variables, give variables meaningful names, just like we want to give our user interface elements good names, such as the play button, rather than just button 1 or button X or something like that. Okay, some examples of good names would be score, length, first name, all stuff that keys the reader of the code, including yourself, in on what that variable is actually storing. Okay, some examples of bad names would be X, Y, A, B. Again, this isn't math class. We're not just going to call all variables X. We're going to give them meaningful names so they make our code easier to read and write. All right, so let's jump over to code.org and actually look at some examples of variables in action. Okay, this is where you're going to want to have your website pulled up so you can follow along, kind of play with the code as I point some stuff out. So right now I'm in Unit 4, Lesson 2, and we're going to investigate and modify sample apps that use variables and learn common programming patterns with variables. Here we go. Again, first thing we have is an app that kind of mimics a digital thermostat, where when I run it, it's going to display the current temperature and then allow me to adjust that temperature with the up and down arrows here. Okay, now the key for making this app work is there's a variable in the background, okay, holding on what the current temperature is. And then every time I click a button, it's going to update that variable and then display it on the screen. All right, in level 3, we're going to actually be able to take a look at the code behind this app. Okay, same app, works the same way here, and then we've got the code to actually check out and see what's making it work. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Top of the code, I have 2 variable declarations and assignments, and typically it's good practice to define your variables at the very beginning of your code. So I've got var temp get 70. So in other words, right off the bat, we're going to store the temperature as 70. And it looks like temp is going to be what keeps track of that as things go up and down. And then I also have this other variable, var temp f gets a empty string, in other words, nothing to begin with. Now I'm going to need the empty string to actually do the kind of showing of the variable on the screen. We'll show you how that works in a second. Okay, then as I go down, I've got my event handlers for the down and up button. And notice within the down button, temp gets reassigned to the current value of temp minus 1 every time that button's clicked. Okay, and then what's the temp F for? We're going to assign temp F to the current value of temp, so the number, okay, plus the string space F. And then each time that button's clicked, I'm also going to set the text of the temperature text, which is this thing right here, to temp F, which is the number, space, and the F here. So really each time I click my button, 2 things are happening. The temp variable is getting updated, and then also temp F is getting updated and displayed. Okay, temp F is just the variable that's being shown here. It's not just the number, it's the number with the F, so it's a string. Okay, the up button works basically the same way. Each time I hit that, temp is going to get added on to 1. Okay, so temp will be a reassigned temp plus 1. And then we have the same line of code here that reassigns temp F, basically the string that displays the temp. Okay, so that's how things happen when we go up and down there. Okay, let's take a look at what it's asking us to do here. First thing is make a watcher for the temp variable. Get rid of my face so I can actually do that here. Okay, what a watcher is just a way to look at the variables behind the scene in case they're not being displayed on the front of the app. Now here it's pretty clear my temp, what it is as I run my app here. But if that wasn't the case, what I could do is I could go down to this part of my debug console where it says watchers and type in temp and hit plus. So I have a watcher for temp. Right now it's undefined, but when I go to run my app, basically that temp variable is going to hold what temp is. And then each time I click up and down, you can see that watcher adjusting going up and down as my app runs. Okay, again, not really a big deal for this particular app just because I can pretty much see temp on the screen here. But if I ever had a variable that was kind of behind the scenes as things are running, it'd be a good idea to do that to kind of debug it and check and see how things are working. Okay, what else is this asking me to do here? Okay, modify. It says right now the temperature is changed by 1 degree when the button's clicked. Modify the code so that the temperature is changed by 2 degrees when the buttons are clicked. Okay, that'll be pretty simple. For the down button, instead of saying temp gets temp minus 1, we'll switch that 1 to a 2. And then the same thing for the up button, temp gets temp plus 2. Okay, now when I run my app, temp should go up and down and by values of 2. Yep, looks like it's working okay. So we can hit finish and move on to the next level. All right, in the next level, we've got the same app with a little variation on it. Okay, now it's going to display both the degrees in Fahrenheit and Celsius. So when I click run, it's a little weird. This one's going to start us with things running slowly so I can see it step through. That's going to take forever. Speed it up. As things run, as my Fahrenheit temp goes up, my Celsius temp goes up as well, correspondingly, kind of with the conversion. Okay, so what's happening here? We've got our same temp in F variable, along with this time a temp C variable, which is just taking the value of temp F, subtracting 32, and multiplying by 5/9. Okay, the pretty standard way to convert from degrees Fahrenheit to Celsius, along with some rounding, which we'll kind of take a look at how that affects things in a minute as well. Okay, we also have this display part for both of them, the display for temp F and temp C. That actually gets shown on the screen here, okay, when we set some text. All right, and then for the buttons, pretty much the same thing's happening here. As each time my temp F is getting adjusted, temp C is getting adjusted based on temp F using that same formula, that same conversion equation. And then in this case, both the temp display F and temp display C's are being adjusted, and then we're setting the text for both of our temperature F and temperature C's every time the button's clicked. Let's take a look at what we want to do here. Let's talk about how this math.round works. Basically what that's doing is just rounding my Celsius temperatures to a whole number. Now this says to delete it, and we'll see what happens here. It's probably going to be easiest to do that with the show text. So I'm just going to get rid of this math.round, and I'll just do it on this line. And when I run, what I'm thinking is going to happen is we'll just get kind of an ugly number to deal with here. Okay, so I definitely want to put that back in, math.round. So that when my temp C gets calculated, we get a nice number. Whoops, math.round is not a function. Debugger didn't like that. Reset, run. Yep. So now it's just keeping things rounded to nice, even numbers. All right, in level 5, we're going to add one more piece of this app here. Basically just the home screen, where when we click run, it's looking for our name. Say Mr. Bailey and log in. And how did that change things? Okay, notice now it's saying, hi, Mr. Bailey at the top of the app, as the app's running the same as it was before, calculating both degrees Fahrenheit and Celsius. Let's take a look at what code got added to make that happen. Let's switch back to block mode. And the only new variable I'm seeing is this var my name. So we're defining a new variable my name to hold the name of the user. And then as I scroll down here to the event handler for the login button, it's going to then set my name equal to hi, the string hi, comma, with a space, plus the get text from the name input. Well, what is that? That's just this right here. Okay, so in other words, we're going to store the string of a hi with a space plus whatever text is in that name spot. Okay, then it's going to set the username text. So we go to the home screen. Looks like this is the username text here to the variable my name, then also set the screen to the home screen. Okay, it's just another example of how we can use a variable that maybe doesn't update as the app goes, but to display something else on the screen. Okay, let's see what else they want us to do here. So we discussed that. Modify the concatenation. Okay, add an exclamation point to the end of the string in the username part. So the way I do that is, let's say I want to make it say on screen 2 here, hi, name with an exclamation point. What we'll do is we want to add kind of just another part to this variable we're defining. And this will be something that's probably best done in text mode as well. So if I want to add the hi, the get the name, we can say plus. Okay, that's how you add strings together with a plus. And within explanation points, we'll say, sorry, within quotations, we'll say we have some explanation points. I'll do 3 of them here. Okay. Now when my code runs and displays that variable here, my name, okay, my name was defined with the extra exclamation points at the end here. All right, then last level just has you answer a question about a block of code here. Do that, submit that, done with the lesson. Now, if you do want to go back and play around with any of these previous examples, add some other numbers to them, add some other stuff to get displayed, feel free to do that. That's what this lesson is all about, just kind of investigating and seeing how stuff works. Remember, if you ever break something through the version history, you can reset it back to where it was before and then keep on playing with it. Okay, so if you do have questions that you want to kind of answer yourself before you get to class, feel free to go to town on that. Okay, otherwise we'll see you later and start practicing more with variables when we get back.